To follow up my greatest 70-point games video, which is already out of date, I wanted to look at the greatest seasons ever by team and look at it from a different lens. Now let me rip off the band-aid now. If a team won less than 65 games in a given season, they're not going to be here. Now, this is inevitably going to leave off some really great teams. I'm talking all-time goated teams. The three that come to mind are the 2001 Lakers, the 1998 Bulls, and the 2017 Cavs.
Now, let me be clear.
I'm not saying which of these teams would win in a tournament. Obviously, 2014 Spurs, probably going to be the 2016 Spurs, but instead, I want to show which team accomplished the most in a given season during their era. Now let's meet our criteria. Obviously, first one, it's going to be wins. 1 point, 1 win, simple. Next up is a bit of a hot take, but it's going to be the number of teams in the league. Essentially, I want to punish instances where there were just less teams and you played that really awful 20-win team 5, even 6 times per year. Building on this category is the number of 50-win teams in a given year. Beating tough teams is not easy. Even in a good year, teams rarely have a strong record against other 50-win teams. So if someone can win 65 plus in a highly competitive environment, we have to reward them for it. Now, I already hear what you're saying. You're saying that's nice, but what about...
How many rings you got? How many rings you gonna be remembered for? That's what I thought.
Our next field is playoff finish. You get 2 points for each playoff series won. So if you lost in the first round, 0 points. You won the chip, 8 points. Our next playoff indicator is to differentiate teams that went 16-1 versus 16-12, and that's going to be playoff losses. Our final stat is my personal favorite, victory margin. Also, please ignore the 2K clips, I am trash. Much like our last video, we're going to start off with Wilt Chamberlain and his 1967 Philadelphia 76ers. This was a milestone year for Wilt, as with a new revamped supporting cast, he shined in some non-ball dominant roles. The Sixers won 68 games, a record at the time, and ended Bill Russell's streak of 8 straight championships en route to the title. So why is this team considered last by a considerable margin? Well, there were only 2 teams in the entire league that won over 50 games, the Celtics and Sixers, and just 10 teams in the entire NBA, making this the earliest and weakest team on our list. Next up, we have the 1973 Boston Celtics, a team I do not have a lot to say about. The league was obviously more competitive than 6 years prior, but the fact that they lost in the conference finals really hurts them here. Shout out to JoJo White, beast in 2K18. Now we have one of my favorite teams ever, the 1971 Bucks. If not for the lack of competition, this team would easily be top 3, given how they went 16-2 in the playoffs and had an absurd 12.3 point differential, tied for the highest on this entire list. People don't give Oscar and Lou credit enough for this one.
The greatest upset in the history of the NBA playoffs.
Oh, we're going there. The 07 Mavs would be left off any greatest teams list, but them being here shows how much of a dumpster fire that season was. In a pretty competitive league, the Mavs won 67 games and Dirk his first MVP award. That he had to accept after being eliminated in that year's playoffs, which was a first in modern NBA history and made for a pretty awkward press conference. The sheer embarrassment to losing to an 8th seed covered up the fact that the 07 Mavs also had the lowest point differential on our list. Now, Dirk used this as a major turning point for his career, and no one really holds this season against him in all-time debates, but doesn't really change the fact that this is the only team ever to win 65 plus games and lose in the first round.
You know, a fun fact for you, you might not notice.
The number of 65 plus win teams has actually been growing every decade, with the 2010s having 7. Yet, as of this video, the 2020s haven't had any. This just in, the 2018 Rockets missed 27 threes in their Game 7 loss to the Warriors. If they would have gone on to win the title that year, they would have shot up 5 spots, but Adam Sandler just does not like Chris Paul for some reason. You know, personally, this was a team I absolutely hated at the time. I had to choose between the stupidly stacked Warriors or James Harden drawing 50 fouls a game. But looking back on things, I appreciate how they were basically the only team to give the KD Warriors any trouble while healthy. As for our last team from the 1970s, the 1972 Lakers held the record for most games won in a season for 25 years and still to this day hold the record for most games won in a row. This was the Lakers' first championship since moving to Los Angeles, and they have the highest point differential, cementing themselves as one of the most dominant teams of all time. Flashing forward, we have Magic's famous 1987 Lakers. They won a ton of games, the championship, but the league only had 23 teams, so that makes them really good. The 1983 Fo Sixers won a ton of games, the championship, but the league only had 23 teams, so that makes them really good. The 1986 Celtics won a ton of games, the championship, but the league only had 23 teams, so that makes them really good. I kid around, but the takeaway with these three teams is how important they were to making the NBA what it is today. If you don't believe me, go watch the 1973 Celtics.
3 hours later.
Alright, to wake you up from the 80th Dave Cowens post-up, we have our next fun fact. The all-time record for most 60-win teams in a given season is 1998, when the Bulls, Lakers, Jazz, and Sonics all won 60+, but none of them actually ended up making this list. There are only 2 instances where teams who made this list in the same year, but we'll get to those later. I love the 2016 Spurs. Like a lot. And I'm not even a Spurs fan. I am convinced that Will Smith has wiped this team off of everybody's memory except mine. I think about this team so often, it might be my Roman Empire. People forget, a major reason why the Warriors had to win 73 games that season is they literally didn't have the 1 seed guaranteed until a couple weeks left in the season. Side note, I actually lost a bet this season because I thought the Spurs would be better and I had to buy breakfast for a week. Honestly, top 5 team all time if they win the title that year. I'm going to group the next 2 teams together because I think they make for a really interesting case study. Both of these teams won 66 games, were led by LeBron James, and actually have the exact same score down to the decimal. Of course, I'm talking about the 2013 Heat and the 09 Cavs. I think these 2 teams, for me, represent the second most impressive championship and the second most disappointing playoff loss for LeBron. It's mind-blowing that LeBron took 2 teams whose supporting casts look like this to 66 wins 4 years apart. To me, this is the ultimate example of how LeBron can function both as a floor and ceiling raiser, arguably better than anybody else on this list. This is the last we'll see of LeBron in this video, but only him, Kareem, and Wilt have been key contributors on 2 different franchises on this list, and if you ask me, LeBron's role far surpasses Wilt or Kareem's Laker days, where they were a little bit closer to the number 2 option. While the 09 Cavs were undoubtedly a failure, the 09 Lakers were unstoppable. Kobe's revenge season in an incredibly competitive league is the stuff of legend. Some circles refer to Kobe as overrated so much, he just might be underrated at this point. In a grueling Western Conference where the 8th seed had 48 wins, Kobe tore through it all to win his first title post-Shaq. This team is great, but in my view, it has a worse supporting cast than any team that follows it. Well, I'd like to dive into some heat maps for our next fun fact. And as you'll see, LeBron is just the most versatile.
It became personal with me.
Michael Jordan is one of only 2 players to lead a team 3 times on this list, and for good reason. I just complimented LeBron for leading 2 different teams on this list, but Jordan essentially did the same thing, only with 2 sets of 3-peats, and the only 2 things in common being Scottie Pippen and Phil Jackson. In 1992, Jordan became the first player to win 3 straight titles in 25 years. This team was legitimately awesome, and the only reason they aren't as high as his other ones is the extra 3 expansion teams. Beating out Jordan's 92 Bulls by 1/10 is Shaq and Kobe's first title, the 2000 Lakers. This was Shaq's version of what Kobe did in 09, proving that he could win at the highest level. He won MVP, led the league in scoring, and averaged 30, 15, and 3 in the playoffs. And if anyone doesn't realize how crazy that is, the average team scores 13 more points a game now than they did in 2000. That period was one of the slowest and most defensively stacked eras, and Shaq was a force to be reckoned with. I'm gonna bet most of you did not expect the 08 Celtics to be so high up. The first year of their new Big Three, the Celtics had the single largest turnaround in NBA history after improving from just 24 wins to 66. They had an incredible margin for victory, and despite losing the most playoff games from anyone on this list, they fought their way through a difficult league with an astounding 11 50-plus win teams. Even though Paul Pierce ends up winning Finals MVP, I view the season more as a legacy year for Kevin Garnett, and, well, we'll talk about him later. Of the top 9 teams on this list, there is one that didn't end up winning the title. There is only one with a unanimous MVP. There is only one with 73 wins. There's only one to blow a 3-1 lead in the finals. There's only one 2016 Warriors. I showed the clips before because if you were an NBA fan on April 13th, 2016, you either watched Kobe's last game or the Dubs' 73rd record-breaking win against the Grizzlies. I watched the former, and I am shocked how well that decision has aged. And before you think this was a common opinion to watch Kobe, you'd be wrong. ESPN booted Kobe's game to ESPN2 to make room for the record, and no one expected Kobe's 60-point barrage, given that the 2016 Lakers would probably make the list opposite to this one. The 16 Warriors overcame so much when they were down 3-1 against the Thunder, and I truly believe, if not for their finals loss, that Steph would be a consensus top 3 player of all time. The next 2 teams I'm going to show is going to be at the same time because it's Steph and Jordan's second time appearing in 2 very strong seasons that are often overlooked compared to their others. But before we do the last 2, please see this fun table highlighting some of the biggest anomalies I found in each category. A team that ruined basketball that year, the 2017 Warriors were unfair with Kevin Durant. They only lost 1 playoff game and honestly probably could have broken their 73-win record prior if not for resting and injuries of some key players. I pretty much refuse to talk about this team other than it's extremely impressive that Steph has 3 teams on this list in 3 years. The revolution this man created in the game of basketball cannot be understated, and nearly every team has copied some parts of his 3-year peak. Damian Lillard, Domantas Sabonis, Tyler Hero, they all owe some of their niches in part to the Warriors dynasty. But, like many lists, qualitative or quantitative, Michael Jordan's 1996 Bulls stand atop. I have no personal connection to this team. I have no stories about their dominance, no tales of fear they instilled, no legends of greatness. But I do have stats. In a competitive league where the Eastern Conference was a tougher out, the Bulls won by an average of 12 points in an era where the average team only scored 99. They beat Alonzo Mourning, Patrick Ewing, Shaquille O'Neal, and Gary Payton in the same playoffs while only losing 3 games in the process. I do believe they can be surpassed, but not anytime soon.
If I had Dwayne Wade and Kobe carried me up and down the court, I'd have 5 or 6 too.
From